let's see. First, I'm going to say, welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo. This is Joe Musi, our guest, Barrett Brown. And we are, of course, have a great show. And I can't wait to get the show going because it's fascinating. Because Barrett is a journalist, adventurer, a person, author. But it really connects to all the things that's going down with the Occupy Wall Street folks. We're going to be talking about that and about your computers. You're never going to look at your computer the same again after we have this discussion with Barrett.
Is this mic for Barrett?
Yes, this is for Barrett.
Thank
this
you
is your
very
new
much.
mic.
Hooray.
Okay.
Joni's going to put it on for you. Just
Very
take
well,
that.
very well.
Let me remove that for you.
There you go.
And we're going to take this.
Here's
Let
the
me
new
just put this out.
operating one.
Yes, sometimes things happen just as we're going to try and not damage this.
Here we go. Okay. We're all set.
All right, great. So I'm just going to put this down here for now. Sorry about this, guys. All right, we're finally going on the air, and I hope everything's coming along great. Our number, by the way, is 212-757-1538, and I'll be repeating that number again. You can call us, and we'll take your calls. I'm looking forward to the call-in section because I know a lot of you folks know a lot about computers and are worried about what it all means and what it's all about. Barrett Brown, tell me a little bit about your background. You're a pretty young guy, but you've done a lot for a young guy. And it started when I was reading one interview about you. It started when you were a teenager, that you became a rebel. What turned you into an anarchist, rebel, hacker, if all those things are appropriate?
I just have a bad character, I think, is what really got it started. But eventually, I think I started to fill in the actual reasoning as time went on. I started out, I was 18 as a freelance writer, and then over the years worked in the media in various capacities, mostly as a freelance magazine writer. And as I was more successful in that, started writing for Vanity Fair and some of the more mainstream publications, I got more and more disenchanted. What
type of articles were you writing? Were they political?
Mostly very mean hit pieces for the most part against prominent pundits like Thomas Friedman, Charles Krauthammer, Richard Cohen. That's actually one of the things that drove me crazy was that I was working on a manuscript at some point, as well as a number of articles on this general theme of the failures that we see in the media in particular, and specifically in the sort of opinion niche of that industry. Once you become a well-known pundit and start winning Pulitzers, there's apparently nothing you can do wrong in terms of the output that millions receive from you every day and predictions that go wrong that will prevent you from having that access, having that huge megaphone. Just for example, Charles Krauthammer, if you go back and read his columns from the last 12 years, you'll see that he's gotten every single U.S. military conflict, large and small, wrong in terms of his predictions. A lot of conservatives had that sort of consolation prize with the surge, at least in their eyes, when they said it would work, and then it looked like it was working. Charles Krauthammer didn't even get that one. He was against the surge, and then 8 months later, when all the conservatives decided it was working, he was suddenly for it, and then attacking people who were against the surge. So that's just an example of what drove me nuts. So media and information flow.
Is it arrogance, or is there something going on?
Arrogance, I don't think that's not something I'm in a position to attack anyone on, but it's just a lot of it. There's a lot of just that whole culture, the Beltway, and sort of the journalism as it's evolved. I use evolved just in a very neutral term. Just the processes and structures that have arisen, just by virtue of all the millions of people with their own individual careers going on and all these factors and pressures, is not anything close to what we might like it to be, or even reasonably expect it to be, in terms of the extent to which expert information, people who have actual track records of predicting things correctly, of other really just demonstrable, I think, objective qualities that we might like our columnists to have, no matter the ideology. That situation is just not as we might, again, reasonably expect it. It's not as good as it has been in some countries. It's not as good as it has been in the past in this country. And in so much as that the means and the mediums and the methods by which we can keep tabs on the quality of someone's past output in terms of have they been right about this, were they absolutely wrong about that. In so much as that these have all increased to make it easier, there's really no excuse whatsoever for someone like Thomas Friedman to be addressing millions of people each week, and for someone like Glenn Greenwald to have a much smaller niche audience.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So when this disappointment that came over you as you did this job and saw that these folks who had big names and huge audiences were basically hacks, from what you were describing. What did that motivate you to do? What did you want to do? How, as a young journalist, how were you going to deal with that?
Well, first I just attacked the hell out of them. I wrote a bunch of articles, for Vanity Fair and Huffington Post and The Guardian and whatnot, attacking them, pointing out specifically what they've got wrong. Started writing a manuscript, which will probably be out in book form in the next 2 years on that subject. And but eventually, during that same process, I also became more and more interested in general, in the ways in which we may now potentially be able to improve this information flow on a large scale, and not even with a whole lot of foundational structure or money behind it, but rather just by thinking up clever schematics by which to improve things. And so that's something I was looking into with some other people for about a year, starting in 2009, and I started a group called Project PM for the purpose of researching and implementing that, along with a few other things.
Now tell us what Project PM is.
And Project PM started out, as I said, as sort of a sort of organization that was composed of a number of bloggers and journalists, scientists, some other people I had gathered along, kind of cajoled into helping me over.
Would you call it like a think tank? Or?
Yeah, I used to call it, in fact, a distributed think tank. Which is a fancy way of saying there's a bunch of us, and we meet regularly in online venues and sometimes via phone, and just try to work out some of these problems in the same way a think tank does, just without any overhead. So that was, and so there was a couple of things we were looking at in terms of not just media information flow, but other related factors. And then, I was involved in sort of some activism and some politics beyond journalism throughout that period. And then in 2010, early 2010, Anonymous first launched an attack on a government. In this case,
let's talk about Anonymous. What is, just for folks who might be not following the news until now, I mean, I've never heard of it. We know what it is, but just explain in a nutshell what Anonymous is.
Anonymous is difficult to define. You're always going to have whatever definition or even assertion you make about it is going to be contested, but I would call it a process at war with the system. That's a definition I think that is consistent throughout its history, which is fast evolving by virtue of it being on the internet. Anonymous started out as sort of a culture. It was a very sort of a sarcastic, very contemporary, fast-evolving culture on several message boards that began themselves, started in 2003. And then over time, it took on sort of a more, it took on sort of the functions of a cultural identity to some extent. I don't want to overstate it, but that's kind of what it seemed like. And then it took on a more activist flavor, very contrary to its origins, through a couple of events, mostly through the Scientology conflict. This occurred.
Yeah, let's go back. Scientology, Anonymous and Scientology got in a dispute, and if folks don't understand that, Scientology is an organization as well as a religion, and they are very jealous about the information. What brought Anonymous into conflict with the Scientology religion?
Scientology, as you say, already had a long history ever since the internet, first became popularized, of being on the forefront of trying to censor stuff. I mean, in 1995, it was trying to launch lawsuits against this Usenet board for publishing some of their secret documents, et cetera, et cetera. So in 2008, when Tom Cruise, a video came out with Tom Cruise addressing a Scientology function and talking all this wacky smack talk, someone released it, put it up on YouTube, and Scientology was very quick to DMCA it, which is to implement a Digital Millennium Copyright Act and get it taken off. So a bunch of people started reposting it for that very reason, and among them was a small group of Anons, people involved in anonymous culture, who decided to take things further by responding to Church of Scientology, not just by that video, but by planning, a large-scale reaction, which ended up taking the form, among other things, of global protests, which actually still go on today.
Are those like denial of service attacks and things like that?
Those are going on as well.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the impact, I think in this case, which is actually contrary to a lot of cases with Anonymous, it was actually people coming to the streets that did the most to bring attention, not just to Church of Scientology and its deficits, but now to Anonymous, and as well to the dynamics whereby a group like Anonymous, or a movement like Anonymous, or whatever you want to call it, can now very, very quickly react and sort of combat and take their place in social and political matters in a much more, I think, tactically efficient, much speedier way than we've seen in the past.
how's Anonymous connected, if not connected ideologically, if not actually connected with WikiLeaks, Bradley Manning, all of that's been happening?
You have sort of similar constituencies. I mean, a lot of people, pretty much everyone Anonymous, you're not going to find anyone there who's opposed to WikiLeaks, basically. You're not going to find anyone who's opposed to Bradley Manning, and quite the contrary. A lot of people who are supporters of Anonymous or involved in Anonymous, have actively supported WikiLeaks. Anonymous itself, in December 2010, launched several retaliatory attacks against PayPal, MasterCard, and Visa when those three companies, apparently at the behest of the U.S. government, ceased processing transactions, donations to WikiLeaks. So Anonymous is very much linked unofficially with WikiLeaks.
How about this whole idea that releasing all this information, if Bradley Manning in fact was the person who did that, but someone releasing all this secret information or confidential information would endanger people in the war zone?
That's always possible depending on the specifics of the release. I would note the first thing is that a lot of the people you see using that as the argument in defense of what's being done to WikiLeaks and to Anonymous and other people in this movement, these people don't oftentimes, they're not very introspective about the thousands and thousands that are killed based on ill preparation for a war, for instance.
And of course the famous video that showed the people being shot up, and that started all this, really, the video.
Yeah, well, WikiLeaks has been around a little bit before and was probably destined to take its front stage, at some point. But that was definitely the one that got into the mainstream media. But if those same people who are so allegedly worried about someone who might be killed as a result of WikiLeaks release, if they expressed concern about people who are going to end up killed based on their own actions, based on their own philosophy, and based on their own political behavior, I would be a lot more convinced in their sincerity.
And now, what about the group Anonymous? Is there a leadership, or is it structured the same way?
The structure of Anonymous, to the extent there is one, is fast evolving. It's really a series of relationships. There's no formal leadership, and there's rarely any effective leadership. From time to time, you'll have sort of a core group of people who have been the most active, who are most involved with other people, who have the most information about what's going to happen, and who, by virtue of a certain skill set or access, can help drive things around in a certain direction to some extent. But basically anyone in the movement can come with an idea and potentially get it started, and that's oftentimes how a lot of great operations get started. The reason I left had a lot to do with, one thing was that I had become sort of seen in the press as a spokesperson and referred to as such.
So you left Anonymous. You're no longer...
Yeah, about 6 months of very heavy involvement. But I'm still involved with the individual Anons. I still come to the same venues, but I'm just... the other main reason, or one of the other reasons, was that I wanted to concentrate more and more on what was discovered and what's still being discovered by virtue of the February 2011 attacks on HBGary Federal and the information, the data set that derived from that.
Right.
And explain what that is.
Yeah, I want to go into that, but I wanted to, one thing that also, one of the moves, when I think Anonymous did that, was involved with the actually taking the information from the police in Phoenix, Arizona, and putting that on the internet, their personal information.
Yeah, and in Texas too, that happened.
Right,
yes.
right. And now, after a certain police officer was involved in the macing of people who were protesting here in New York City,
they
down
doxed
Occupy
him,
Wall Street, I saw his name is all over the internet. His
name and other info, yes.
It's already. So this is something new. I mean, there's been lots of demonstrations and protests and lots of conflicts between. I've seen in my own life over years and years between protesters and police in New York. I've never seen the individual officer who gave the order taken to task in the internet in front of millions of people around the world in quite the same way.
I think he sprayed the spray.
Right, right, and he's going to be a famous person from now on. And that I've never. That's a new development in demonstration and protesting.
It's one of those things, one of those tactics that really was. It's very common and anonymous. It's been very effective. It's something I've done a number of cases, particularly with the intelligence contracting industry, and it's fair play, I believe. If a police officer believes he has the right to use mace on a cage full of people, then I think that we all have the right to comment on that and to talk more about that officer and just sort of put the spotlight on him.
Now, what is the connection between Anonymous and what's going on down at the Wall Street occupation?
Well, Anonymous, the organizers, it's a number of groups with varying ties to Anonymous or none at all, really. And then Anonymous, a lot of Anons were very much involved in the past couple months in planning this and trying to get it to be a success. And there were a lot of Anons down there on varying days, particularly on the first day. I was over there on Sunday and spoke on the live stream about some of the stuff I'm about to talk about, the intelligence contracting. And but I think most of it, there's a lot of people you don't know. I guess you don't know, and I'm not really a traditional activist. I'm not someone who ever really went to protest. It's not something I see as the forefront of what we should be doing. But at this particular protest, there was a lot of people there who didn't look like your stereotypical protester. So I mean, it was a really unusually eclectic mix of people, and not eclectic in the
wasn't
Austin.
The usual suspects.
Right.
As often it
Well,
is.
some of the usual
Some of the usual suspects.
Oh, the usual suspects were all there, but yeah, in addition to them. Yeah.
In addition to them were actually other people with different backgrounds.
All the people who've been hoping since the 60s definitely are out there.
Now let's talk about, I wanted the next 12 minutes of the show, I'd like to talk about your research. HBGary, let's start with them. Who are they? What do they do? Why should we care?
HBGary is one of these intelligence contracting companies. And the intelligence contracting industry is something, it's something that it's arisen over the last 10 years mostly. It's a series of private firms or semi-private firms that increasingly provide a larger and larger portion of the intelligence budget in terms of the capabilities that are purchased with our tax dollars, and at the same time are increasingly providing some similar capabilities, and sometimes the same ones, to private companies, other private companies, and in some cases foreign governments and even foreign dictatorships. Now, HBGary Federal first came to our attention on February, I think either 5th or 6th, when a Financial Times article came out, in which they quoted the CEO, Aaron Barr, claiming that he had discovered our alleged leadership. And even this article itself, where he gives a few examples of what he's allegedly found by virtue of his infiltration and his research.
Oh, about Anonymous.
Yep. Even the samples in the article were totally.
He was going to give Anonymous a taste of its own medicine, basically.
Sort of, yeah. He had been infiltrating. Not really infiltrating. I mean, our servers, those servers are public that he was on non-ops. But he had been there for a while and had tried to put together a lot of information, login times, to try to identify the actual names and other information of Anons. And this is right at the time where the FBI had just a couple weeks earlier just raided 40 U.S. citizens at their homes, stemming from this PayPal incident with WikiLeaks. So,
I would like to talk about that too a little bit, because there are a lot of people who are facing time right now. They're facing trial and prosecution for their involvement in this. Well,
we've got them well hooked up with a lot of great lawyers, particularly the National Lawyers Guild stepped in early on. Stanley Cohen is representing one, and then Lieberman Devine in San Francisco.
Stanley's been on this show.
Of course, I'm sure he has.
He's been here. Very good. And so go on, tell us more about this HBGary group. This guy who's head of HBGary who decided that he was going to rip the sheet off of Anonymous and tell us who the truth was.
He makes it known that he's got all this information. He's going to release some of it and talk about it at this conference. And it's also found out a little later that day that he's going to be meeting with the FBI in the following Monday, 2 days afterwards. So first thing we did was I and a couple other people wrote a little comical press release, sort of making fun of him and putting that out, and et cetera. And then the next day, one of the people I wrote that with, and a couple others, they hacked HBGary Federal, infiltrated their servers, scraped their website, took their 70,000 emails the company had over the last couple of years.
But it scraped their website.
Oh, actually, I should probably use the term deface. They defaced their website. They put a message from Anonymous saying, this joking thing, this website has been confiscated under rule.
What's that image? That face image? That's the
Guy Fawkes mask. Yeah, that was
very often used as an anonymous.
That was actually chosen very early on, during the Scientology protests, by virtue of it being the most available and cheapest mask that would be available in all these cities.
And what is the symbol behind us right now? The sort of
this is a Project PM symbol. This is something I devised sort of as a half joke. It's kind of a play on some sort of wacky, mystical symbology that a lot of people were into. I thought it'd be funny. Since I was going to make a symbol, I wanted it to be esoteric as well, but not really. So
let's get back to HBGary now. It's all very interesting, and I think all this background is sort of important to get to people understand these things, because it is a very technical world. For most of us are not as we came to computers later. We weren't brought up with them, so we have to learn and sort of get up to speed with folks like yourself who came up as a sort of a mother's milk.
Yes, we're well aware. Yeah.
Right. And so tell us a little bit about what now you or groups. What did you decide to do about this HBGary company and to put them back on their heels?
Well, these other guys at Anonymous, they hacked them and took the 70,000 emails, and then I had some conversations with the president of the company that owned this HBGary Federal, HBGary. And then I had a conversation with Aaron Barr himself a little later that day, and then they came on a couple times that day onto our IRC, where we, at this point, was still the major central organizing
What's
this
an
anonymous
IRC?
internet relay chat, just a chat room. Don't worry about it. But so this negotiations are going on. But as that goes on, we start reading through the emails. We find out that Aaron Barr and Penny had both been lying to us about their intent. About Aaron Barr was claiming the FBI came to him, and turns out he had spent 2 weeks trying to take anyone who would listen that he had this information, try to promote himself. So all those emails got released, and then...
So in other words, he had all this response came to this guy, he lost all these emails, had his site defaced, and in fact, he didn't really even have anything. He never got anything.
What he had is still debatable. We that same day we took on one of his pages of notes that had a number of people's names on it, including mine, just my IRC name, which is Barrett Brown, actually, but I didn't have my real name, Barrett Brown, attached to it. Anyway, there's actually some discussion of Project PM in that document. But anyway, so I think there's another document that he may have had that may have been a little bit more accurate, but the point is that what he had and what he was going to show to the FBI was terribly erroneous. He had names in there of people who had never been on the anonymous IRC and who had just supported WikiLeaks or Facebook, WikiLeaks or Anonymous on Facebook. He thought he had the leader, and this guy is a guy who actually lives he's an organic gardener who's never been in the IRC, and he had him conflated with 2 other people. So I mean, it was just all kinds of wrong. Now, whether the FBI would take that seriously, whether they can even use any of that in their rules of evidence and all that, we're unsure of that. But anyway, so his intent was something that would have caused a lot of people a lot of problems for no reason. But anyway, but more importantly, he came after Anonymous, which was really, to be truthful, the main reason why this started.
Pulling the tiger's tail.
But then afterwards, shortly afterwards, when these emails are out, and journalists are now aware of this and looking through them, and it's discovered that HBGary Federal, along with 2 other companies called Palantir and Barrico, had created something called Team Themis, which is a little consortium of the 3 companies, from which they were going to provide their capabilities, many times very, very high-end capabilities, to other private firms, including Bank of America and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Bank of America had come to Team Themis through the law firm Hunton & Williams, which had, after having gone to the Justice Department and asked, what can we do about WikiLeaks, which was going to release information on Bank of America. Justice Department, apparently, I guess it's part of the role of the Justice Department to help other corporations launch covert attacks on their enemy. Apparently, yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was in there in the Constitution.
They helped them launch a covert attack.
They said, hey, go to Hunton & Williams. They're apparently good at this kind of thing. Hunton & Williams, and then works with Team Themis and Bank of America to broker this deal. And you have Team Themis writing a proposal that involves clandestine cyber attacks against WikiLeaks. It involves going after Glenn Greenwald, the journalist who had been a very, very effective supporter of WikiLeaks. All these other disinformation and DDoS attacks in some cases, which is that.
And how did this come out? This came out in these emails and documents?
They came out very quickly in those emails when the press started looking around. And then after that, there was a few other things that got a lot of notice in the next couple of weeks, since this was a big novel story with the company being hacked in the first place and all that. But after a while, the press starts going to the well. They decide the story's over. Nonetheless, there's still these 70,000 emails sitting here, the vast majority of which no one's read, and more to the point, which no one's really analyzed, which are still sitting there, and it's still bearing information. So what we did in Anonymous, first we launched a program called Operation Metal Gear, and there was a few of us kind of working together for a couple days, pursuing a couple leads. We had some informants at that time. And since then, we've sort of, when I left Project PM, I sort of took that effort with me. And now what we do is we look through this data set, these 70,000 emails, plus some more that have been acquired by hacking attacks, and plus some other research we're doing aside from that, to try to put together what we can about this industry and some of its capabilities. One of which, persona management, is something else that's very, very, I think, frightening long-term when you think about the implications. Persona management involves a single person being in control of any number of fake online people, usually complete with their own biographies, with their likes and dislikes, and perhaps most importantly, sort of facilitated with software that not only translates conversations, across languages, but maintains a consistent cadence. It remembers, automatically prior conversations. Otherwise, organizes what's essentially a nuclearized SOC threat process for anyone who wants to do this. Now,
so one person could have a force of non-real people out there who people think are real.
Absolutely.
Which can be used as, back maybe 30, 40 years ago, we had journalists who worked for the CIA who could put a story to get everybody running on Chile and undermining the government. So now we could do that on the internet. You could have 100 different people saying, go to this location.
Oh, I see. It
where
looks
the
like
police
a lot
are
of
waiting.
people agree with something.
Exactly.
Yes.
They can manufacture an appearance of consent. They can manufacture the idea that, there's a number of uses for that.
Manufacture dissent, manufacture opinion.
Now we know the U.S. Air Force was bidding on a contract of that sort, or was asking for bids on that, and we know which company got that bid, and we know that was being done for CENTCOM, which is using that capability under Operation Earnest Voice with unspecified multinational forces. But obviously that opens up a can of worms in terms of the military's uneven past in terms of maintaining a legality and refraining from, using disinformation on the U.S. civilians. But even beyond that, remember some of these same companies that are developing persona management that we now know are developing it beyond the first couple we knew about. Some of these are the same ones that we've already caught trying to, sell their capabilities, in a very unethical way to other institutions and other corporations.
Now, Barrett, how do people get the information you're compiling? Are you going to write a book? Do you have it available on the internet?
I have we maintain a wiki, which is, you can find it at www.echelon2.org. That's ECHELON 2.org, where we, for the past 4 or 5 months, have been compiling pages on various companies, various individuals, various capabilities, concepts, etc. Everything everyone needs to know to get up to speed, partially at least, with what's going on in this industry. And the reason this is important, first of all, consciousness raising awareness is not really one of my favorite things. It's kind of one of those things that's often an excuse, not to do something. But in this case, my concern, and the concern of a lot of people who have looked at this, is that the popular conception of what's possible and what's doable and what's done in terms of the intelligence world, which is now apparently expanding to include all these corporations as well, not just the CIA. Their conception, it's sometimes naive. You hear a lot of, you start talking about this, you hear people say, oh, conspiracy theory. So it's important that 10 years down the line, when these things have evolved even further, that people are going to be ready for it when some journalist starts reporting on this and it sounds fantastic. We want people to be prepared for what exists now. And there's really there's no sure way of fighting it other than to try to make it impractical for these companies to pursue it, which I think we
to be able to think twice when you read something on the internet. That are you sure that this information that you're reading on the internet is accurate and hasn't been planted there? Thank you very much, Barrett Brown, for joining us on Let Them Talk.
Thank you.